This meeting will now open. This will be meeting number 32 of the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Today, as a result of a motion presented, this is a meeting that is dedicated to threats posed to Canada's national security by individuals returning to Canada from having been involved with terrorist entities abroad, including the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, ISIL. We have our witnesses gathered here today, and we thank you very much for attending. Of course, we have the Honourable Stephen Blaney, the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. We also have from the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, the Deputy Minister, Mr. Francois Gaumont. We have from the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, Mr. Maleko Colombe, Director. And from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we have Commissioner Bob Paulson. So welcome, gentlemen. We do certainly appreciate you coming here today. As we do know, this is an interest, it's a global interest, and of course it is a serious Canadian interest. As that, we thank you for your appearance today. And Mr. Blaney, Minister Blaney, you have an opening statement, I believe. You're on, sir.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to first of all thank the members of the committee for having provided me the opportunity to speak today on this very, very important question of terrorism.
Mr. Chair, it continues to puzzle me why a minister comes before a committee, has the full resources of the department, and does not come with a translated, prepared statement he is going to be reading from notes. It benefits us as a committee if with that statement in front of us. So I'm asking you, through you, Mr. Chair, if the minister has a statement that we could follow.
I will just ask the minister, does he have a statement that will be translated that we can prepare? And if not, we will proceed
Monsieur le Président, ma déclaration sera dans les deux.
My statement will be in both official languages, Mr. Chairman. The interpreters who don't have the text will do an excellent job. It may be that, of course, I wander from the text were it prepared. I do not have a text to distribute to anyone, but I will table in both official languages this afternoon the public report 2014 on threats to Canada, terrorist threats to Canada, where you'll find the major points of my presentation this afternoon. And as I said, I will be speaking in both official languages. As a Quebecois and a Canadian, I'm very proud to address this forum in English and or French.
Interjection, Mr. Easter, and you now have the floor. Proceed, Mr. Blaney.
Thank you. Canada faces serious and significant threats associated with violent extremism. On le sait, au cours des derniers mois, la situation en Irak a continué de
In the course of the last few months, the situation in Iraq has continued to deteriorate, whereas ISIL, which I will designate as its acronym, ISIL, Islamic State, Iraq and Levant. The world is terrified by the brutality of this group and its disciples. Conflicts such as those that are occurring in Syria and Iraq currently are very troubling, not only because of their violence, but also because of the instability that they introduce into the area. This is why we are acting. Yesterday, our Parliament following a vote of confidence in the House, decided to provide humanitarian aid and a military assistance role for the next 6 months in order to combat terrorism.
Taking about the barbaric atrocities committed by ISIL abroad, today I want and would like to focus on the threat they pose to Canadians in our streets and communities here in Canada. Le Canada, tout comme d'autres pays,
Canada, as with many other countries, including some of our closest allies, see a small number, but a significant number of its citizens go abroad in order to participate in these terrorist activities. Particularly, the conflict in Syria has been attracting a number of individuals. Some join terrorist groups such as a Islamic State or others. The Canadian government is aware of the existence of at least 130 individuals who are linked to Canada and suspected of participating in terrorist activities such as training and the collection of information for terrorist operations and participating in terrorist activities.
Of about 80 who have returned to Canada. Let me be clear, these individuals posing a threat to our security at home have violated Canadian law, as was passed by this Parliament in the Combating Terrorism Act. These dangerous individuals, some skills and desire to commit terrorist activity pose a serious threat to law-abiding Canadians. I can confirm for Canadians that as we speak, the RCMP is investigating these individuals and will seek to put them behind bars where they belong. We are taking concrete action to protect the safety and security of Canadians. La stratégie antiterroriste du Canada.
Canada's anti-terrorist strategy continues to be based on the premise that we have to have a strong, safe, and resilient Canada. With these four key elements, prevent, detect, prevent, and respond.
La stratégie oriente notre réponse à l'extrémisme.
This strategy informs our strategy abroad.
At uncovering and disrupting terrorist plots that would have had devastating consequences had they succeeded. Just last year, our national security agencies dealt with a plot to attack a passenger train en route from New York to Toronto and a plot to detonate a series of improvised explosive devices at the BC legislature during Canada Day celebrations. Je voudrais préciser dans ce cas-là qu'il y a un des accusés qui est soupçonné d'être étudié.
I should point out that one of the suspects has studied at the Laval University in Quebec in engineering and is now facing very serious charges on these crimes.
These hateful plans come to fruition should give us all pause as legislators and a dire call for appropriate response to the threat. That is why our government passed critical new tools for our security agencies to deal with those who hate our freedom and seek to cause us harm. Avec la loi sur la lutte contre le terrorisme qui est entrée en vigueur,
Our anti-terrorism law that came into effect in 2013, the actual fact of leaving Canada or intending to leave Canada to commit terrorist acts has become a criminal activity.
These new powers to investigate and prosecute terrorist travel planning and to stop potential extremist travelers before they leave the country. We passed the Strengthening Canadian Citizenship Act to ensure that those who take up arms against the Canadian Armed Forces or those who are convicted of engaging in terrorist activities can no longer remain Canadian citizens. La Gendarmerie royale du Canada dirige...
The Royal Canadian Police is inquiring as to a number of travelers in Canada. This gathers together a number of national organizations to take a look at the travels of extremists and others. The RCMP has recently brought charges against Hasibullah Yousafzai, a resident of British Columbia, for having joined a terrorist organization. This is the first case where formal charges have been laid depending on this new anti-terrorist act, and the charges were drawn up in July of this last year, Mr. Chairman.
Jabhat al-Nusra as a terrorist entity, which means that it is a criminal offense to provide any sort of assistance or support to the group either at home or abroad. Recently, our conservative government announced the listing of the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant. We call them Islamic State, in all its form and identities as a terrorist organization, making it clear that joining or attempting to join this despicable group is a terrorist offense. Those who associate with this barbaric group should face the full extent of Canadian law. And as the Prime Minister said in the House of Commons this very past Friday, in the coming weeks, we will bring forward additional measures to strengthen the ability to our security services, law enforcement, national security organization to monitor terrorists and those Canadians who have literally been brainwashed to take part in this evil cause. Be assured, Mr. Speaker, that they will face the full force of the law. Bien sûr, nous continuons d'agir afin de protéger notre frontière avec les États-Unis.
Of course, we are continuing to act in order to protect our borders with the United States and with other countries, depending on the measures that we use to counter this terrorist threat. We have the passenger protection mechanisms, a program which identifies any who might bring a threat to our air travel. Refuse to embark the passenger, we can revoke passports for security purposes if the national security is in danger.
Barbaric terrorists who seek to harm us and our way of life is the first duty of any government. It is a responsibility I know you take very seriously. It is a responsibility that I take very, very seriously. We must take a strong stand in no uncertain terms. Le barbarisme, c'est pas une valeur canadienne, ça en sera jamais.
Barbarity is not a Canadian value and will never ever be one.
Terrorists who despises us and our way of life. We will take any action necessary to keep Canadians safe from this evil entity. That being said, our action extends beyond enforcement. The first pillar of our counter-terrorism strategy is prevention. Preventing violent extremism is an essential element of our response, and that is why some of the important work is being done in this regard as we speak. These events have helped us establish relationships and allow us to assure cultural communities that we are working with them to ensure that our youth do not become radicalized and that those seeking to radicalize them are stopped. That's what the Kanishka project is all about. We are funding research that is studying the participation of Western extremist travelers in the conflict in Syria, how they communicate, how they travel. This research will give us the building blocks that we can use to develop better strategies to stop radicalization before it ever manifests itself. The most effective response to criminal activity of any kind, including violent extremism, is found in the partnerships that police officers build with the communities they serve. Ces partenariats dépendent quant à eux des agents de police.
These partnerships, of course, depend on police and security agents who are very fully informed and are able to identify the precursors of any terrorist activity or involvement beyond all consequence.
Officer initiative provides frontline police officers and other first responders with essential terrorism awareness training. These counter-terrorism officers are equipped both to inform and educate others within their agencies so that they can identify national security threats and violent extremist behavior at the earliest possible stage. More than 1,700 candidates have participated in the program since its establishment 5 years ago. In the last year alone, more than 325 people have been trained by the counterterrorism team. So, how do we stop people who are radicalized but have not yet engaged in terrorist activity? Early intervention is key to a preventive approach to counter violent extremism. Our CMP members are working with local agencies and community resources to develop violent extremism intervention programming aimed primarily at young people at the periphery of violent extremist activity. Pour conclure, Monsieur le Président, je veux...
In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to repeat the importance of continuing to detect, prevent, and overcome these plots in our country, and to try to dissuade any of those who may wish to participate in these activities or wander into fanaticism.
The unwavering vigilance of our intelligence and enforcement agencies, and despite the tremendous support that we receive from our communities, we remain acutely aware of this ongoing threat. We can never take the safety and security of our citizens for granted. Addressing terrorism, addressing the related problems of radicalization to violence and extremist travel, requires the concerted effort of many partners. Together, we must remain vigilant in this global fight and adapt to the changing nature of its threat. To this end, our government will not hesitate to continue to provide law enforcement with the tools they need to prevent further radicalization in this country and to arrest those who would seek to do us harm, as we already have. As member of this very important committee, I count on your support to pass swiftly those important measures when tabled. I encourage members of all parties to put past stances behind them and to support our government's efforts to keep Canadians safe from barbaric organizations like the Islamic State and other terrorist entities here in Canada. Merci. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And are there any other opening comments? We're fine. Fine. Thank you very much then. We will now go to our round of questioning, and the first round will be for 7 minutes, and we will start off Parliamentary Secretary. Yes, Mrs. James, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the committee, Minister, and other guests. I remember some time ago when the Toronto 18 was mentioned in the news, and I have to tell you, I was probably not alone in the fact that I was shocked that this type of activity was going on here in Canada. With more and more information coming out with people who are traveling overseas to engage in terrorism and join ISIL and other groups, we've also heard stories in recent news about Australia and Britain and being able to thwart attacks, stop attacks that were going to happen in their country. And yet, right now in Canada, and probably some members in the House actually believe that Canadians will be immune to terrorism, that somehow we can escape terrorism here on Canadian soil if somehow, you know, we hide in the darkest corners of Canada with the lights out. Minister, can you please explain your opinion on this, why those types of why that type of ideology is in fact dangerous, that we could become complacent and not react to the real threat that poses to all of us here in Canada?
I thank the member for his question, the Parliamentary Secretary. You are right. terrorism is a threat. This is a reality for our national security and law enforcement agency. I was given the opportunity to meet with students in Bellechasse, and I think this afternoon in particular of a young Quebecer who was doing her shopping in Nairobi, Kenya, a little bit more than a year ago, Anne-Marie Desloges, and she fell under a terrorist attack. So another fellow Canadian from British Columbia. It happened in Nairobi, Kenya. It also could happen here. We were successful, as I mentioned in my speech, to deter 2 terrorists' plot, one in Victoria, BC, the other one in this derailment of a train in Toronto, New York, and the other one we were also successful to deter is the Toronto 18. What I think we can feel now is that with the Combating Terrorism Act legislation we pack is enabling our law enforcement authority to intervene before the attack occurs, and that's how accusations were laid upon some terrorists. And let me quote you what the judge said about the a terrorist who got 10 years in jail for planning to join the Islamic jihadist group in Somalia. He is the first Canadian to be convicted for attempting to join an overseas terrorist group, and as such required sentence that might deter others, was saying the judge. She said terrorists are the worst kinds of cowards because they deliberately target innocent members of the public who are not prepared for combat. This is what said the Ontario Superior Court Justice Dina Baltman. We have to send a strong signal. She did it as a judge. As politicians, we have to do everything in our power and within the scope of the law and our rights to empower our law enforcement agency so that they are able to do their job, which is to protect us. So that's our duty as politicians from all parties, actually, to support those reasonable measures that are put forward to increase our capability, especially to track those traveling citizens who are willing to commit terrorist acts, whether here or abroad. Let me just quote, if you will, she went on to add, the judge, and despite being the recipient of a privileged Western education with its emphasis on free thought, this individual aspired to join a terrorist group that seeks to annihilate those who think differently. We cannot negotiate with those who want to cut off our head. We are determined and resolved to tackle with terrorists, and that's why we need to move on with our strategy and bring forward tools that are needed by our law enforcement and national security community to tackle with terrorism.
Thank you, Minister. In your opening remarks, you referred to ISIL and used the term barbaric atrocities. Also in your remarks, you indicated that you had listed ISIL as a terrorist entity. Of course, we all know this. But how does listing ISIL as a terrorist entity, how does that impact the funding and the recruitment of individuals here in Canada?
Thank you for your question. As you know, as a country, as many Western countries, we are moving forward with the listing of terrorist entities. The reason why we are doing that is multi-purpose, and I may let Mr. Coulombe comment on that. The first one is clearly to deter and cut any source of funding, because some of those terrorist entities were using supposedly noble cause to channel funding that is used at terrorist purpose. So we need to inform Canadians that those entities are terrorists. They don't share Canadian value, and they are willing to use violence to attain their mean. So the listing of terrorist entities is cutting the funding, is enabling our law enforcement to keep track of those involved in those activities. And this means that if, and what it does also, it does make illegal and criminal offense to be in any way involved with those organizations. You want to say something? So that's why lately we listed the Islamic State. They were somewhat coming out from another entity that was already listed, but we felt the need, since they were distinct, to list them separately. And we also listed other entities. Wherever there are terrorist entities, we are tracking them, and we are always monitoring the number of the group that could represent a threat, and in order to protect Canadians.
Can I ask how many more minutes?
Finished.
So I was afraid of that.
Thank you very kindly, and now we will go to Mr. Scott. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Minister, Commissioner, Director. I was wondering, Minister, if I could go straight to what I see as the heart of the matter. First of all, I should say I'm really pleased that the government continues to emphasize the first step in the resilience report from 2011, prevention. It's not just about people coming back and then the criminal law taking over. Prevention would also kick in even when they're returning. I would hope we would all agree. But my question is, where the rubber hits the road is with communities and particularly families. We all read in the newspapers often enough, or see on the news, when a parent sort of either says, I didn't know, but as often they say, I knew, I started to see some signs, he was hanging out with the wrong people, he's becoming dogmatic in his views, then he disappeared, then he did this, I didn't know what to do. And in a recent article about the Edmonton Somali community, Mohammed Accord, the head of the Canadian Somali Congress of Western Canada, he simply has this advice: if you suspect your children are going to be recruited, go to the authorities. Save your child while you can. So my question, simply, Minister, and with any assistance from your colleagues, is what exactly is triggered if a parent now goes to the authorities with these kinds of worries and suspicions? Do we have a proper system in place to know what to do? What do we do?
I thank you for your question. There's a multi-level approach to prevention. At the political level, we have established a cross-cultural roundtable where we meet with leaders of communities. As I've indicated, we have our Kanishka program, which is looking at ways on how are recruiters functioning, how do they recruit, how do they communicate, how are they making use of social media. That's critical, that's very important. And also, there's the reach out program of the RCMP. Maybe the commissioner can talk about it. But what I can tell you is what is critical, and we've seen successful operations that were rightly initiated by parents who were concerned by behavior of seeing some individual getting radicalized. I will turn to Commissioner Boson, who has an important record on reaching out. You will see the numbers are quite telling.
Thank you, Minister. I guess what I would say to your question is that there are two challenges in that fact pattern that you're putting forward. A parent trying to reach out to communities to engage and intercede on behalf of their family member. The first challenge is getting family members to act early enough. The second challenge is getting our frontline officers, and it's not just the RCMP, but it's all of our partner police agencies across this country, to be able to recognize the importance of what's being referred to them and to engage the right sort of resources in the communities. That's what our counter-terrorist information officer program does. It inserts in many frontline police forces and offices informed officers who know how to manage that. And in the pre-criminal space, before we're into criminal investigation, there's opportunities for all sorts of people to come and bring their expertise to bear. The other thing that we do, once we have a sense that the individual is heading down that path, is try to sort of hub the resources that are available by our partner agencies and government our local government resources and intervene with the family so that we are able to act and prevent prior to the criminal investigation being launched.
Thank you very much. I think that gets me on the right road for understanding that there at least is some kind of a system in place that doesn't simply say create a dilemma for parents. Because I know some parents would sort of say, if I report, the state of the law is such that maybe my child will be arrested and charged. And so as long as the message gets out that, in fact, the police themselves are organized to approach it differently in the way you've described, I think we're partway there to effective response. So that's really good to hear. Minister, I was wondering if I could ask, we've heard a lot about the September 24th Security Council Resolution 2178, a very comprehensive resolution that that details a whole bunch of response measures that all states are called upon to do with respect to mostly radicalization and the foreign fighter phenomenon. And my simple question is new legislation being prepared or obviously going to be prepared as a consequence of Security Council Resolution 2178?
Well, my question will be legislation is be prepared to adjust to the reality of the terrorist threat that we are facing in this country. This more broadly would take into account the resolution. So indirectly, it does link to those resolutions. Yes.
Okay. So, and one of the reasons I'm asking is it is quite broad, the resolution, and so I can imagine that there are some features of our legal system that may not exactly respond to the resolution. And so a second direct question, there's two actually together. Is Canada considering or will we need to implement an exit control system as a consequence of the resolution?
No.
Okay. The second is that in testimony before the Senate on the Combating Terrorism Bill, S7, the former director of CSIS, I believe, testified that Cabinet had before it some proposals to approach the no-fly lists differently, to expand the lists. So what I'm wondering is whether or not, partly as a consequence of Security Council resolution or in general, whether any decision has been taken on using no-fly lists differently than they've been used in the past.
Okay. Let me be very clear. We are really not contemplating exit control. We'll leave it to totalitarian state. What we are contemplating, and this is part of the agreement between President Obama and Prime Minister Harper, is information exchange. As you know, we already have this in place for foreign national. It's working very well, and we are committed to expanding it as it is clearly stated in the Beyond the Border plan. And this is part of the tool we can provide our law enforcement agency to have more information on the influx of people, and especially those representing a threat. So we are indeed working on information sharing. You may remember last week Secretary Jay Johnson was here and reiterate his will to see us working in that direction. We are committed, and we are committed to work with other European countries as well into that direction of sharing information. Basically, the information you find on a passport that is already shared with the country where you are going. So this is something we are working on.
Fine. Thank you very much, then, Minister. And now we will go to Mr. Norlock, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and through you to the witnesses. Thank you for attending today. My questions will be mainly to Commissioner Polson. One thing I think, or one issue that Canadians look at that in the past has caused problems with regard to investigations, et cetera, is cross-jurisdictional cooperation and information sharing. And I wonder if you could share with us your relationships with other jurisdictions, such as municipal or provincial police, and more importantly with CSIS. And so is there a formal integrated program that you access, I would think, on a daily or frequent basis to make sure that there's basically no firewalls between jurisdictions that would cause information not to be received that could be important?
Okay, well, Mr. President, thank you for the question. I'd say, first of all, in respect to the relationship with CSIS and how we've, I think, demonstrated both CSIS and the RCMP a sort of highly tuned, sophisticated exchange of information that has resulted in several successful arrests and prosecutions in recent years. And so I would say that the relationship with CSIS has been refined to a point where it is highly reliable and functioning well. With respect to other law enforcement agencies in the country, there are a number of mechanisms that we rely upon to ensure that we do have the timely flow of information and the ability to sort of inform the law enforcement community about trends and the nature of the evolving threat. And they, as I had mentioned earlier, the Counterterrorism Information Officer is a program that has been subscribed to by certainly all major police forces. We co-chair the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police Committee on Counterterrorism, which is really the central hub of policy sort of development or practice, refinement of our practices. And in our integrated national security enforcement teams, when we are in, say, a big city like Toronto that has quite a elaborate police force of their own, we're able to work with them, the Ontario Provincial Police, and others to accomplish what we need to accomplish. So I'm very comfortable and confident in the nature of the relationships, both within law enforcement and especially between the service and the RCMP.
Thank you very much. The other part I think that my constituents, I think Canadians would like to know is, and we don't always read about them, we may read about specific cases, but I wonder in general how many terrorist-related offences have the RCMP made arrests for, and without getting into specifics of possible investigations, what are you currently involved in investigations that are worrisome to you? In other words, that appear to perhaps be bigger than you earlier anticipated. When I say bigger, I'm talking about the potential for significant harm to Canada.
Well, I think as the Minister has indicated, and certainly as my colleagues all understand, and I'm sure you do as well, the threat of terrorism is a real priority for law enforcement and for the government as well. I would say in respect of our successful arrests and prosecutions, I think the record stands for itself. There's been numerous arrests and prosecutions. I would say now, though, and I would include the service in this, because we are joined at the hip in terms of how we manage a response to the threat. I used to run national security in the RCMP, and the pace and tempo of operations is fairly brisk. We're operating probably at about, we have about 63 active national security investigations on 90 individuals who are related to the traveling group, both people who intend to go or people who have returned and have been referred to us by the service. And so the pace and tempo of operations is quite brisk.
Thank you very much.
But I should add, as I meant to conclude with, it's nothing that I think that Canadians need to be alarmed about. I think that we are managing through our collective efforts a response that is both appropriate to the nature of these suspected offences, but it is at a brisk pace and tempo.
Thank you. And as a result of a couple of those statements, I guess I'm going to switch over to Minister Blaney now. Minister Blaney, having been on the Public Safety Committee for some time and working with you recently as a minister, I wonder if you could tell Canadians some of the balances that governments have when we're dealing with such serious threats as terrorism and yet be able to maintain a free, a society in which we respect the rights of Canadians while doing our best to protect their safety. And could you just tell me some of the concerns that you would have as a legislator, working with, of course, your cabinet colleagues, to ensure that we protect Canadians, yet at the same time respect their freedoms, and how sometimes the two can sometimes somewhat clash?
Yeah. Well, I thank you for your question. We live in a state of law. On vit dans un État, un pays où on a l'État de droit. It is extremely important that we adopt legislation and that clearly define the authority, roles, and responsibility of both our law enforcement agency and our national security agency, so they can clearly operate within the scope of the law. That's why in a situation where we see a direct threat to Canada through those terrorist organizations, and specifically the Islamic State, we need to be able to table legislation that is clearly defending the mandate and also enabling those the agency to protect appropriately Canadian. This being said, we have this afternoon with us two very critical agencies, including the department, which is monitoring and is overseeing many activities. But there are more than 20 government agencies involved in the terrorism strategy. It goes from the border controls with the CBSA, it goes with finance, with stopping those who could be tempted to provide money to terrorists. There is it goes to Health Canada in case of a terrorist possible attack. So this is a broad approach. They've been working together. Well, we have to remain vigilant, but there are mechanisms in place, and it's a broad government approach. Of course, prosecuting, gathering intelligence is critical, and also another bridge that is critical is to convert this intelligence into evidence that can be laid in front of the court. And for this, I see that the RCMP is being successful as we see the number of cases and charges and sentence increasing, especially with the tools we are providing. We need, as legislators, to provide them the tools, to give clarity, to give them clear authority so they can work within the scope of the law. And with that, this is our way, this is our part. We are part of that success to counter successfully terrorism.
Very much, Mr. Blaney. A little over time here now. We will now go to Mr. Easter, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, and the security and policing organization heads for coming as well. I don't think, Mr. Minister, any objective observer would believe that a single meeting of this committee in any way constitutes a careful examination of this threat of radicalization in Canada. I don't think one single meeting is enough, and Mr. Chair, as you know, I have a motion on the floor that basically asks for a subcommittee off this committee to call the people that are here before us today, but also to invite other interested and concerned stakeholders from across the country to testify on the extent and consequences of radicalization activities in Canada. And I believe, Mr. Minister, you mentioned, I didn't catch the name, but you mentioned also a group that is doing some research that I think that committee should also meet with. So I would hope, Mr. Minister, that you would think it's definitely our duty as parliamentarians as well to look further into this issue, and I'd hope you would encourage your colleagues when I bring forward that motion, which Mr. Chair will inform you now will be at the first of the next meeting that we hold. So I would hope you could support us in that, Minister. Turning to an issue that I think you, Mr. Minister, and your parliamentary secretary have put in the news, and that is, I believe it's called the Al Sunna Mosque in Montreal. I have before me a document from the Department of Defense marked secret that was leaked, but it has been in the public domain about the imam that was there. And I believe the allegations were made that the mosque was a recruiting site. Given that both yourself and the parliamentary secretary, and that's been in the public domain for some while through intelligence from the Five Eyes that we cooperate with, can you expand for this committee today on the threats related to that mosque? And secondly, what has your government done on that file?
Alors, je vous remercie pour votre question.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for your question. This afternoon, as you have seen, I have distributed our report, Terrorist Threats to Canada, in both official languages. I'd like to urge you to familiarize yourself with it. We are quite close to the subject right now, and I'd like to point out the statement that I make that it is, in fact, the #1 concern for national security. We have to do everything possible to fight against this terrorist threat. And as parliamentarians, you know that I should be very proud that I'm prepared to move to revoke citizenship of dual nationals in this country who participate in these activities. As a Canadian citizen, I don't want to see a terrorist use a Canadian passport to achieve terrorist ends. If they come to Canada, let them adopt Canadian values. If they want a Canadian passport, they swear allegiance to the state, to the Crown, and it's treason. It's treason to do otherwise. And I think the judge was quite clear in her statement, in the Hersey conviction. We have to have the tools necessary to fight against terrorism. As to your specific question, you'll understand that anything that may refer to operational activities, politicians are responsible to guide and provide policy to those in the front lines, but we leave it to the proper agencies to act as they must.
Explain again your #1 priority. It's our #1 priority too, terrorism and radicalization that put at risk Canadians and others around the world. I'm asking you what action you're taking, because that issue has been in the news for some time. You mentioned the mosque. Your parliamentary secretary has mentioned the mosque, and I'd like to know what is behind that statement and what there is. But let me turn then to another subject. You have mentioned that you have arrested or that you have charged one individual under the Anti-Terrorism Act. Now, as I understand it, the individual was charged on July 17th, when in fact that individual, my question to you is, has the individual been arrested? He's been charged. My information tells me that he in fact left Canada 6 months earlier, and in spite of the fact of being on a no-fly list, he left the country and he was charged after the fact. Is that information correct? Has he been arrested?
Je voudrais d'abord répondre à votre première question, Monsieur Easter.
To respond to your first question first, Mr. Easter, the specific activities or individuals, as politicians, we have a responsibility. If we're aware of somebody who has heinous activities in mind or is participating in terrorist activities, we have to disassociate ourselves from that. Absolutely. We live in a democracy. We cannot tolerate those individuals who promote violence and terrorism. That is unacceptable. That is our first responsibility. Then it is to provide our law enforcement agencies the necessary tools so that they can neutralize and intervene and bring about charges to those who are trying to recruit or trying to perpetrate criminal acts, terrorist acts. You yourself has mentioned that we have a common responsibility to fight against terrorism, and I hope that we can count on your cooperation when the time comes to act concretely to fight against terrorism.
Still not getting many answers, Mr. Chair, and yes, I know all about the issue. I've signed some certificates myself in a former life. In any event, The CSIS, head of CSIS mentioned before the National Defense Committee in the Senate, the 130, you mentioned them. You mentioned the 80 individuals that have returned to Canada. It's not only the 80 within Canada. Anybody who holds a passport we trust that has become radicalized, whether it's British, United States, Australian, are a risk to this country, and they're a risk to the others as well. My question is, on those 80 individuals, have any been arrested? Have any been charged?
Monsieur
and how
Easter,
many passports have been detained?
Monsieur Easter, vous me demandez de commenter.
You're asking me, Mr. Easter, to comment on active operations currently underway. As I can only counter with another question. I mean, we have to give the law enforcement agencies the tools that they need. Would you agree to revoking the passport? Would you agree that we strike Canadian citizenship for those found guilty of participating in terrorist acts? We are politicians, Mr. Easter. Let the police be the police. Let those who are intelligence officers do their job. But are you prepared to support them by providing them the tools? Is your party prepared to disassociate itself from those who perpetrate violence here or abroad?
Madame Michaud, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, je vous remercie beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for the presentation. I'd like to return to the issue of preventing radicalization. It's an issue that is of great concern to all of us here at this committee. And I believe that in the current context wherein we find ourselves, I believe that the Minister may be precipitating us into ill-advised participation in Iraq. There's been some discussion in public as to this very fact might be used to recruit and radicalize others. We have to work even more diligently and increase cooperation with community groups, other associations throughout the country. What specific measures have been taken, what steps have been taken to work with these community organizations and groups to prevent radicalization? And please be brief, because I have a lot of questions. Well, that's a very broad question. There's a number of questions being asked and activities being taken by the RCMP and other agencies to try to reach out to collective community organizations. I sit on the Transcultural Roundtable myself, for example, and have met with the community leaders of various stripe in Toronto, for example, the Somali community. I met with some imams to discuss these issues. There's been tens, dozens, if not hundreds of meetings, and the RCMP has taken the lead on this issue. So if you don't mind, I'll allow Commissioner Paulson to perhaps describe what's being done in this vein. Thank you, Mr. Minister. As I've already stated, we do have some programs, and we have met with various communities throughout the country with our police partners locally. I'll continue in English if you don't mind, in order to be as clear as I can. We've met with these communities to inform them of the threats and how to respond if they have concerns or worries with members of their community. Mr. Paulson, I have to interrupt you here, perhaps just to realign my question, refocus my question, because I really would like a very clear answer if I can. Rather than telling us about all these meetings that you've had, are there extra financial resources that are being attributed or freed up in order to allow these community groups or community group leaders to intervene with their youth in order to prevent radicalization? The 2012 budget announced millions of cuts between now and 2015 for public security purposes. So I have a number of questions as to how you're going to reach out to these communities, to those at-risk individuals, so that they can prevent radicalization. Well, let's dot the I's and cross the T's here. As with all federal agencies and departments, We've had operational reviews which have had no negative impact on operations. All the operations which have been implemented, and there have been many, these are public servants, these are police officers, other representatives of the state, if you will, that go into these communities for these interventions. The RCMP, I think you're being a little bit modest, Mr. Paulson. There's been hundreds of meetings throughout the country. And these are only the operations that have been undertaken by the RCMP. It's one of the pillars of our strategy, prevention. It's very important, and this is why considerable resources, I mentioned in my statement, hundreds of RCMP agents who are specialists in counterterrorism, who do training, who are in the field to identify, detect, and prevent susceptible individuals from participating in terrorist activities. We're not skimping on any of these resources when it comes to terrorist threat. Half a minute. Well, I hope my colleagues can follow up on some of these questions. And in any case, we spoke briefly of cooperation with other agencies and partners, police forces throughout the country. What type of cooperation, what kind of activities are going on with provincial governments, for example, in order to better understand the factors and determinants of radicalization among the youth? Well, I'm in constant communication with my counterparts provincially. The counterterrorism fight, of course, is principally involved with law enforcement agencies and partners, but perhaps Commissioner Paulson could flesh out the answer a little bit. He's been very active with the Toronto Police Force and others.
We're well over the time, and we'll hopefully get the response on another round or another question to that, or you can hold it to when it's convenient for you. So we will now go down to Mrs. James again, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And do I have 7 minutes or 5?
You have 5.
5, thank you. I'm just following up on some of the questions that my colleague across the way, Mr. Easter, had asked regarding a mosque. I actually just came across another story of the leader of the Liberal Party, Justin Trudeau, visiting another mosque at the beginning of September. This is a different mosque than I think the one that Mr. Easter was speaking about, and in fact back in 2011 the imam at this mosque talked very favorably of following through with Sharia law here in Canada. And in some of the comments that are in this news story, he talks about stoning women, cutting hands off of thieves. I thank Mr. Easter for bringing up that particular situation with the other mosque. Again, here's another one, and I'm just wondering, Minister, if you're aware of this particular story, do Canadians need to be worried? Do we need to be alarmed? What is your reaction to this?
Je vous remercie, Madame la Secrétaire parlementaire.
I thank the Parliamentary Secretary for her question. When I hear this type of stories, I get chills up my spine. I just get gooseflesh because Canada is supposed to be an emancipated society. Our Canadian values insist on equality between men and women. And we have to do everything possible as politicians to promote these Canadian values. Equality between the sexes and the primacy of law, the rule of law. I find it troubling, just troubling, that Canadians or potential Canadian citizens abuse of our tolerance in order to make a very hateful type of statements which run counter to our Canadian values. As a politician and as a citizen, we have to be revolted and repulsed by these kinds of statements and behaviors which are unacceptable in their contemporary Canadian society. And once again, it just shows the responsibilities of politicians. We have a duty, a responsibility to disassociate ourselves from such statements as rigorously and vigorously as possible. We have to be proud of what's been accomplished here by women and the advancement of women in Canadian society. And any threat to that progress has to be struck down immediately. with all the energy possible. We cannot allow anyone to just say anything here in this country, which in fact might incite violence or threaten the security of other individuals. We have to disassociate ourselves from such ideas and statements. We meet a lot of people in our lives, different opinions and such, but when we meet this type of opinion, we have to disassociate ourselves unambiguously and unequivocally from these statements.
Earlier in the testimony, you talked about an individual who was sentenced to 10 years in prison. I'm wondering if you could speak specifically about any of the other, if you can mention any other cases where people have been charged or have received sentencing. And secondary to that, if I have time, although I'll leave that with that question for now.
We're done?
Oh,
Okay, so your question is, sorry?
You had talked about one individual who had been charged or arrested and has received a 10-year sentence. I'm just wondering if you could talk about any other individuals that have been charged under any of our terrorism legislation and laws.
Yes, I can. And well, I can tell you about Mr. Usufzai. The thing is that he was the first one who was charged under the new Combating Terrorism Act. The individual was known to have traveled to Syria to join Islamist fighters. He is charged under, he was using a false passport. So there's a lot of challenges with those individuals who are willing to travel abroad. They are sometimes using passport, and we have experts here who can tell a lot about the whereabouts. Yeah, we have many cases. One that is also shocking is that sometimes those individuals are coming from all stripes of society. In particular, there was an individual who was studying in technology in a university. So it is very important to do everything in our capacity to detect those who are willing to undertake terrorist activity.
Yes, point of order, Mr. Easter.
I wonder, based on this discussion, if the minister could have posted on his website those mosques and religious centers across the country that we as politicians should avoid. I mean, I travel the country. I could go into a religious center and not realize that it's a threat.
No, excuse me. No, that question is not in order for this meeting today, so we will just carry on now. And now we have pour SECU, Madame Duré-Lefebvre.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to Minister Blaney, Mr. Guimont-Poulsen, and others that are here today. I think it's very, very important to discuss this issue and air it as thoroughly as possible in committee, and I'm glad to see you're here to assist us. If you'll allow, I have a few questions which are related to the budget. Given the cuts that have happened in public security dossiers recently. And of course this would encompass terrorist and terrorism activities and our fight against these in Canada and abroad. Mr. Minister, you have in fact said that there have been cuts, we know this, but that these had no negative impact on operational services. In 2012, CBSA had serious cuts to their budgets and many positions lost. I believe that CBSA is one of the agencies that is on the front lines of protecting us and assisting our international partners against terrorist threats. So what's the situation there? Will the money be reintroduced into the security branch of the Canadian Border Services Agency? How are we going to live up to the resolutions of the Security Council as well in this vein? Well, thanks for that question. And as I mentioned earlier, it's important to allocate budgetary resources depending on needs. I mentioned that there are over 20 agencies involved in a counterterrorism activities. As you've seen this afternoon, the RCMP is making very, very significant contributions to the counter-terrorism fight, and they are using the necessary resources. Now, if you'd like to talk about the Canadian Border Services agencies, we are supporting them fully. We've invested very heavily, particularly on the information exchange programs. Financial resources are important, of course, but legislative support is also very important. This is why Parliament seeks to assist CBSA to make their best contribution against terrorism by developing tools to improve the exchange of information and data between Canada and its partners, particularly when travelers or extremist travel is involved. The information that we find in our passports, the date of leaving the country, for example, etc. These might seem minor or trivial information, but this is very important information. A lot of extremists are trying to travel through third countries to get to Syria, for example, Egypt or Turkey, and they're trying to sneak their way in and sneak their way back out. Now, to assist border agency services, we are trying to provide them the best tools possible, give them the means to fight against terrorism, particularly through this interchange of data with our partners. $195 million have been cut of the RCMP in the same budget. That's almost $200 million in your budgetary envelope. Has this had no impact on your counterterrorism activities? Well, thank you for the question. Short answer, no. We've changed our management protocols and systems.
Our federal policing model, and so consequently we're able to move resources into and out of national security cases to match the sort of tempo and pace. So it hasn't, the cuts have not affected our operations.
Thank you very much. And now Mr. Carmichael, please.
I'm going to direct my question to Mr. Coulombe. You've been getting a bit of a pass this afternoon, so. Mr. Coulombe, there's in spite of the media coverage, the extensive videos, all kinds of things that we've seen, the horror of ISIL, there's still a feeling in Canada from some of the people I've heard from that we are not at risk in Canada, but rather it's isolated in the Middle East and that region. Would you please comment on how significant the threat is of violent extremism to Canadians, please?
Thanks for the question. Mr. Chair, if you bear with me, I'll just quote, it'll just take a few minutes. If you can kill a disbelieving American or European, especially the spiteful and filthy French, or an Australian, or a Canadian, or any other disbeliever waging the war, including the citizen of the countries that enter into a coalition against the Islamic State, then rely upon Allah and kill him in any manner or way, however it may be. And then it goes on saying that kill the disbeliever whether he is a civilian or a military. That's an audio speech from ISIL this September that was released. In the same audio speech, ISIL is also urging their supporters to conduct attacks in their home countries, not back in Iraq, not back in Syria, but in their home countries. In addition, if you go back to April, there was a video that was that you could see on YouTube where it says, "This is a message to Canada. We are coming and we will destroy you." That was a member of ISIL who's actually a Canadian citizen. In addition, you have to remember, we've talked about, in fact, it was mentioned earlier, it's not just Canadians who are joining ISIL, but it's also all the other Westerners that are joining ISIL that we trust their passport and could leave Iraq and Syria and enter Canada to actually conduct a terrorist attack here. At the same time, and you just have to look at what recently happened in Australia, the lone actor, the people who are here never went to Iraq and Syria, but are actually inspired by the type of audio speech I've just quoted from, and who decide to do something in their home country. In Australia, a young 18-year-old boy was killed after he tried to stab the two police officers. That young boy was actually stopped from traveling and going to Iraq and Syria. And not a few days prior to that, over 20 Australian citizens were arrested because they were planning attack. Among those attacks, killing just civilians and throwing the ISIL black flag over the bodies. So the threat is real. Like Commissioner Paulson said earlier, we don't want to sound alarmist. We're telling people that they should go about their daily life, but we have to be vigilant. The threat here in Canada and to Canadian interest abroad, it is not just a question of here in Canada. It's Canadian interest and Canadian citizens abroad that are also targeted.
And yeah, truly alarming would be an understatement. And Commissioner Paulson alluded to or spoke about the number of arrests that have been made, obviously real threats to that security in this nation. And we've got, there are reports of 80 returning, or some 80 returning foreign fighters who have come back to this country or in the process of coming back to this country. I wonder if you could talk about some of the measures that CSIS would take to investigate these types of threats to Canada's national security and what CSIS is actually doing to ensure Canadian safety.
I'd like to start by clarifying.
One moment, Mr. Colom.
Just to clarify one thing, and I did mention this when I appeared in February in front of the Senate committee. When we're talking about 80 returnees, we're not talking about 80 people who fought in Iraq and Syria, and we're not necessarily talking about people who were directly involved in terrorist activity, in planning terrorist activities. We're talking about people. We have Canadians in Afghanistan, Pakistan, in Yemen, in Lebanon, in the Sahel, in the Maghreb, that are involved in terrorist-related activities, but it could be fundraising, could be propaganda. So I don't want people to believe that we have 80 returnees who were hard fighters in Iraq and Syria, because that is not the picture we have at the moment, although we have some of them.
Extremists that would be a threat to our security?
All of them could potentially be a threat.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Scott, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if I could touch on the question of those who've gone abroad who can't necessarily return. So we're talking in the terms of reference today are those who've returned more or less, but because of the passports being revoked of some who've gone abroad, and I'm not questioning why that could actually be necessary, because of the fact that it actually kind of locks them in and means they can't then travel to other countries like France or Germany, etc. But it also leaves them on site. And so if there's anybody who's had their passport revoked who's Canadian, by definition, is it by definition they can't come back? In that case, what happens to the stories we hear of some Canadians or others who go over and just haven't a clue what they've got themselves into? They're radicalized, brainwashed, they get there and not so long after they want to come back. Their passport has been revoked. How do we deal with that? Is there some kind of a plan for that?
I'm not sure I understand your question. What I can tell you about passport is I would defer your question to the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration. Yeah. And could you rephrase your question, please?
Yeah, first premise, the Minister of Immigration has indicated that some passports have been revoked of individuals who are currently abroad. So it's not a preventative measure from letting them go abroad, which is an important part of our tool chest. They're there. They can't come back. So by definition, we're not going to be dealing with them as a returnee. How do we deal with the issue of once they've left, have we decided with those individuals, their lost causes, they're either going to be captured or killed or left in Syria or Iraq? Or is there some idea about how some Canadians who have their passports revoked and have second thoughts can come back?
If I may just bridge to, I think the statement that was made by Mr. Coulombe is pretty clear. And what I can appreciate this afternoon is we can have this discussion about terrorism and also about the threat that it represents to Canada. And may I remark that those statements that were made by those terrorists were prior to the debate we had in the House of Commons a few days ago, prior to the vote we had yesterday.
Right.
And actually, we are well aware that all of those part of the coalition, whether they are humanitarian, combat, airstrike, boot on the ground, we are, they all coalition are targeted. En d'autres termes, ce que, pour moi, qui ressort très clairement...
In other words, what stands out quite clearly in what Mr. Coulombe has said is that we cannot just get down on bended knee in front of these terrorists. They're fighting abroad, but we have to fight terrorism here as well as abroad. If individuals have decided to leave the country to participate in terrorist activity, they represent a threat to us, whether they're outside of the country or not, and we have to do everything possible to hamper their activities. And if we revoke a passport, we revoke a passport. This would be in the case of double nationals, dual nationality. Now, of course, the authority comes from a CIC minister, and of course, he's going to act on evidence that's provided by authorities.
And the director. With respect to the Minister of Immigration being the only one responsible, this is supposed to be an integrated approach, right? So maybe the Public Security Minister isn't going to answer exactly about the passport issues, but with respect to the Passport Canada Security Bureau, the Passport Canada Security Bureau being the investigative agency that advises the Minister about revocation, the question I simply have is CSIS and the RCMP integrated into the decision-making process of the Passport Canada Security Bureau. So is there at least that kind of integration to know that there is good intelligence flowing to the Minister of Immigration?
Mr. Chair, actually that's exactly what's happening. I mean, we do exchange information with not just Passport Canada and the RCMP, but that integration, coordination, deconfliction is actually, if not daily, at least weekly on that very specific issue.
So that's good to know. And good.
Thank you, now, Mr. Scott. And now we will go to...
I just wanted to add a little bit, Chair, to that answer. I appreciate
sure,
that.
Go ahead,
we're short on time. I'll be brief. But I think that's... my colleague was referring to the information exchange. We have bi-weekly meetings among all of the affected agencies where we look for options to intervene with high-risk travelers, folks who have not yet gone, folks who we've tried to work with, folks that maybe are approaching the criminal space and we haven't got enough evidence to charge. We're looking for alternatives. We've been successful. CBSA and the Passport Bureau and the team has been successful at bringing charges against at least 5 individuals in respect of passport misuse, a criminal charge. So we're looking for options within the existing sort of framework of authorities to be able to intervene in accordance with our laws.
Fine, thank you for that clarification. And now, Mrs. Ablonzi, please, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. We're all aware, of course, that Britain just yesterday arrested another 4 individuals on strong suspicion of terrorist intent. And the report in the New York Times of that arrest pointed out that in August, Britain raised their classification of the threat level of terrorists to Britain to severe, the second highest classification of threat. Mr. Coulombe, how would you characterize the threat to Canada right now?
Okay. So I may say a few opening remarks and let Mr. Coulombe come on. Well, that's an excellent question. The threat, as we can see, is real. The threat is there. and the threat is, and as a country, we are constantly adjusting to the level of threat. That's why this afternoon I tabled the 2014 public report on the terrorist threat to Canada, which exemplify the various terrorist entities throughout the world that represent a threat. So we are focusing at this point in time on the Islamic State, which has clearly represent a threat. I won't repeat what they have said or what has been said, but this is clearly so. That's why we, as law enforcement, need to make sure that we are providing the tool necessary to our law enforcement agency and national security intelligence, so that they can adjust appropriately to the level of threats. Monsieur Coulombe.
I was just going to mention, in terms of what is the threat today, I'm not going to talk about a scale, or what I can say is, compared to the late 90s, 2000, before 9/11, the threat is different. It's more diffuse. It develops a lot more rapidly. The use and the sophisticated use of social media, for example. Radicalization can happen really quickly. The development of an attack actually also can happen really rapidly. Movement of people, so the threat is different. Now, this phenomenon of what we call foreign fighters, especially in the development in Iraq and Syria, I think is, like I've mentioned, real. It does pose a real threat, but again, we have no information indicating an imminent attack, but we have to remain vigilant. The threat is real.
A colleague shared with us recently that an extended family member of theirs was approached at work, someone trying to recruit them, saying that, that Western values were not working, and that there was a better way, and that ISIL was paying good money for people to join them. When this individual reported it to the supervisor, the would-be recruiter was simply moved. Is there a way that people can report these incidents? I mean, surely they shouldn't just be swept under the carpet and not acted upon.
No, absolutely not. I think that's part of our outreach program, is to be able to connect with Canadians and make sure that they feel comfortable in being able to raise that information.
So, but who would they raise it with?
To the local law enforcement of jurisdiction, the police. We have a 1-800 number into our operations center in the RCMP, but into the local. You can be absolutely confident that we will get going on a call to a local law enforcement. So the local law enforcement of jurisdiction gets a call like that, and we will make sure that that gets investigated. All of these investigations, the ones I referred to earlier, are all sort of centrally overseen by a fairly crack team of experienced officers here in Ottawa, and that's why it's so important that we're able to get frontline officers recognizing the significance of a call like that. So I would encourage whoever is referring that to you to refer it to us, and we will intervene.
Thank you for that. And other citizens may have similar experiences. Director Coulombe, Minister, mentioned the social media as a tool of recruitment and radicalization and brainwashing. I see has been used. What measures do you think are going to be necessary to deal with the social media aspect of this issue?
Well, I think sensitize people to the risk at all levels is crucial. What's the English expression? Whack-a-mole, where you try to stop it from somewhere. You can close a website, then who's going to appear the next morning? The servers are quite often not in this country. So I'm not saying there's nothing that can be done in that arena, but I think it's a lot more important to sensitize people to the threat, the risk, and try to prevention. Commissioner Paulson was talking about, from the police perspective, just to go back to your earlier question, the service as a tip line. Our telephone number across the country are public telephone numbers. So if people come across this or if they have questions, they can phone us, use the tip line, go to their local law enforcement. So there's a number of ways that that information can be passed. I think it's just, again, a question of people being sensitized to the issue and being aware that there is a way to bringing that information to us.
Very much. Time's expired now. Mr. Falk, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to direct my comments to the Minister. And first of all, thank the other witnesses for attending and for their participation here. When I travel around my constituency, which I've done the last couple of weeks attending various fall suppers, inevitably the discussion goes to the activities of ISIL and ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And of course, my constituents are concerned. They become much more concerned when the threats are made against Canada. And the question is, how safe are we really? Should we feel comfortable or should we feel angst? And I'm just wondering, I know you've discussed a little bit the interaction between the various departments, sharing of information on a weekly basis, that's good, but we live in an instant society and we don't wait for weekly meetings. And I'm sure terrorists don't either. And I'm wondering, can you expand a little bit to your departments, the security agencies, the Border Patrol, the RCMP, how much do they operate in silos? Is there a central database? Or can you tell me a little bit about the fluidity and exchange of information?
Commissioner Paulson talked about, for example, weekly or bi-weekly meetings. That's just one way that we're exchanging information. When I was Director General in Quebec Region in Montreal, and I know things haven't changed, every day several meetings are taking place, for example, between the service and the RCMP, the service, CBSA. It can be bilateral meeting, it can be trilateral meeting, it can be with local enforcement, it could be with La Sûreté du Québec when I was there, and the same is happening across the country. So I don't want you to think that this is only happening like once a week we meet and we chat. Those meetings are possibly more strategic, but I can assure you at the tactical level, in headquarters here in Ottawa and across the country, there's meetings all the time, exchanging, deconflicting, and making sure that we're moving on each file with the best option possible.
So I would agree, obviously, with all of that, but I would also add, you know, that in this sort of climate, it's helpful to remind Canadians that this is everybody's business, that we just can't, certainly we have many refined systems and processes to investigate, to respond, to arrest, to collect information. But we really count on the eyes and ears of Canadian citizens to recognize what is suspicious activity and should be reported. And I think we're seeing a trend that is improving, but it needs to be restated that terrorism, counterterrorism, is everybody's business.
I could not agree more with Commissioner Paulson. The resilience, building awareness, and also I would add the boots on the ground. We in this country have every law enforcement officer, every police officer, everyone who is involved and reaching out is part of our counter-terrorism strategy, but also every Canadian is part of it, and I cannot agree more with Commissioner Paulson. This being said, it is critical that we as politicians make sure that we are enabling all law enforcement to adjust to this evolving threat. We've seen clearly this afternoon that the threat is evolving. We probably are very few who were aware of the existence of this terrorist entity a year ago, and now this is a direct threat to our society. So we need to be able to adjust, to evolve, and that's why the Prime Minister has clearly stated in his statement, in his speech Friday, that we need to tackle with terrorism over there, joining the coalition. We need to provide those who are impacted by terrorism humanitarian aid, but we also need to be, I would say, steadfast in our commitment here in Canada as a government, as politician and as party to support initiative aimed at enabling our law enforcement to tackle with this evolving threat.
Thank you for the answers to those questions. That's
Mr. Falk.
that is reassuring information that I can pass on to my constituents, that indeed there is good collaboration between all the law enforcement agencies that we have. Thank you very much.
Fine, thank you very much, Mr. Baku, Ministre et Madame Michaud.
Oui, je vous remercie beaucoup. Je vais...
Thank you very much. I'd like to come back, if I could, on the question raised by Mr. Scott earlier, because we didn't get an answer. And I think it's very important if we're to understand the legislation and the repercussions whenever there's a revocation of a passport, for example, of any citizen who might be involved in terrorist activities. I'll give you a concrete example which might illustrate my question. A youth, 17, 18 years of age, who unfortunately fell in with a bad crowd, was radicalized, and takes a very bad decision to go abroad. His passport's revoked, and of course I'm not saying that he should or shouldn't be. I understand fully what underlies passport revocation. He goes abroad, he participates in terrorist-related activities without being a combatant. Perhaps a few weeks or months later, he realizes it's the worst mistake of his life, and he really wants to put some distance between himself and his newfound friends. He'd like to come back home and then continue with a proper lifestyle. Is there any way that this individual can get his way back in? Now, regardless of what might, is it an irrevocable decision if the passport is withdrawn and that person is condemned for the rest of his life to stay in that country, that other country? Well, I'd like to come back on a point. As a parliamentarian, it's important to understand the extent and the seriousness of radicalization and how far these individuals can go. I'm thinking of Karen Bledimets, a young Canadian woman who was killed in Afghanistan. There's somebody who's ready to die for their convictions. You cannot negotiate with a terrorist. So what you're telling me, the answer to my question is that individual is condemned to stay there for life. As the Minister of Public Safety and as responsible for the security of Canadians, if an individual represents a threat to the lives of Canadians, we have a duty to do everything possible to impede them from killing Canadians. So I told you in my example that there was no question of being a combatant here. I'm trying to understand all the impacts and ramifications of a decision to revoke might cause. Right now, I have a very partisan response, but it doesn't answer my question. That individual then is considered a threat for life, forever, and there's no recourse if we revoke a passport, regardless of what that individual might present as repentance or regret or whatever. I just wanted a clarification. Well, perhaps Mr. Coulombe could comment on that question. Mr. Chair, I'll try to reply, but I'm sure it will not reply completely to the question. Our purpose is to collect and analyze information and provide that information to Citizenship Canada, for example, in the context of the question. We evaluate a threat. We advise Passport Canada of our conclusions. The final question, the final decision, is not ours to make. It's Citizenship Canada to revoke or not revoke, to rescind that revocation later or not. That's not our decision. We provide the information that denotes that the individual poses a threat, or it could be information that later clarifies it no longer poses a threat. Thank you. I think your answer was much more objective, and I thank you for it. Now, Mr. Minister, you mentioned earlier that research has shown how we can better understand the recruitment into these organizations. Is there any research underway to better understand factors, determinants that might lead youth to be radicalized? Well, yes, as I indicated in my presentation, our government has established a program through Kanishka. It's over $10 million, which is invested for research in the development of tools to our law enforcement agencies on how terrorists exchange information, how they use social media, how they travel, how they connect and communicate. We have resources dedicated to that purpose. A little bit more time?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will be passing my time over to my colleague, Mr. Norlock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, once again through you to the witnesses. My question will be to any of the witnesses, but we'll start with Monsieur Coulombe. I was recently at an event in my riding. One of the people at this event has a young son, he's in his early 20s, who is currently serving. He's with the American Armed Forces, he's with the infantry, and he's serving in Afghanistan. He's at the end of his service there. They go through a 9-month rotation, we 6. And the father was telling me that many American families, including themselves who are in Canada, put on the front of their porch when their children are serving, or could be a grandparent or whatever, proud military family. He said recently they have been asked, these people who display the signs, by the authorities, by the armed forces, to take the signs down because their intelligence agencies have learned that those homes will be targeted. The reason I ask that of you is because many of my constituents on the front lawns, especially during our stint in Afghanistan, had in their front lawns lawn signs that said, "We support our military." And I'm wondering if CSIS is aware of that, of the U.S., and have you any reason to send the same message to Canadians? Because quite frankly, I found it very disturbing when I found that out. And like Mr. Falk and like Ms. Oblonsky, our constituents are asking us certain questions. And I didn't respond to him or didn't comment. I just shook my head when he mentioned that.
Well, specifically on that issue, and if you remember several months ago now, this serviceman in Britain that was stabbed to death on the street wearing his uniform. That kind of incident, obviously the service will look at it, not just the service, ITAC, it's part of their job to assess the terrorist, to do the terrorist assessment. And we will look at the potential, we'll make an assessment in terms of potential threat against, in this case, military personnel. Like I've mentioned, the role of service is to advise government. So in this case, we would advise DND, and it would be to national defense to decide what kind of stance do they have to take in order to, if there is really a threat, to mitigate that threat, and what are the measures they need to put in place.
Thank you very much. And we've heard various questions this afternoon concerning prevention. And as a former police officer, I always say prevention is always very good. One of the things, of course, that was mentioned by Ms. Oblonsky, I think, I'm just wondering if we shouldn't start something like Crime Stoppers, make Canadians more aware of reporting terrorist threats, just like you would in Crime Stoppers report a crime. And I guess, and I do truly believe we need these outreach programs, such as cross-cultural roundtables and our counterterrorism information, and working with it. But you made a statement, Mr. Coulombe, repeated a statement made by the radical Islamists. And do you think showing more love to people who want to do us harm and take advantage of the freedoms, and showing them more love will entice them more to understand us and dissuade them from their terrorist ways, or affect even Canadians? I guess we have a multi-pronged approach. So feel free to talk about further your feelings with regard, or any of the other witnesses, your feeling towards these extremists, if that by showing them more, I don't know, love and understanding will somehow dissuade them from doing what they're doing.
I think this afternoon and through the last month and the last year, our country has been facing a serious national threat we've seen our law enforcement agency, the RCMP, being successful at deterring some plot. We are dealing with individuals who have deep belief and who are rejecting Western values and Western way of thinking and Western way of living. And they are ready to use violence and return what they got from in some cases from this society. And unfortunately, we have seen recently in some videos some of those examples of hatred. We have to be steadfast in our message to anyone who is willing to undertake terrorist activity that these individuals will face the full force of the law, whether here and abroad. And in no way we can compromise with individuals who are willing to attack and kill innocent victims. There is nothing that can prevent us from doing everything in our capability to intervene. What they will face the full force of the law. They will go behind the jail. They will benefit from our correctional services rehabilitation system, where they can give second thought to their belief. But one thing is certain, on ne peut pas avoir des électrons libres dans la société canadienne.
We can't leave these individuals free in Canadian society and free to spread their terrorist and fanatical positions. I mean, as a society, we have to take all measures possible to protect our citizens so that they can get on with their daily lives. And individuals who have to live by the law, and if they are accused of anything, they get convicted, they will be rehabilitated.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the document, and this is, Mr. Minister, in all fairness, this is not new information. It's information that we've read some time ago in terms of the public report on the terrorist threat to Canada. But in here on page 14, the government is aware of about 80 individuals who returned to Canada after travel abroad for a variety of suspected terrorism-related purposes. It states specifically, because we're getting some confusion from the answers, 80 individuals who have returned to Canada. My question earlier was how many have been charged is not looking at operational details, it's looking at what's, I know CSIS, NSERC, RCMP, Canada Border Service agencies are doing all they can. But I want to, it specifically is how many were charged. The other concern I'll raise, and this is terrorism is a real threat. Before the chairman of the United States House Committee on Homeland Security in the U.S., I quote what he said, these are people, 13,000 according to the UN statement following the Security Council meeting of September 24, 2014, with legitimate passports from any of 80 countries from which these foreign fighters have originated. That is no question. It's a real risk to Canada and to our allies. And I think we need to see someone respond with the fact that there is concrete, specific action being taken. Second point that I want to mention, Mr. Speaker, comes back to the mosque. And Mr. Minister, I don't want, I'm not going to be political, but I do not think it does national security any good for you or your parliamentary secretary in terms of whatever you may say about another leader in this country, to have the collateral damage happen to a mosque that may or may not be causing problems. If there's problems with individuals in a mosque, then take action against them. Don't make crazy statements out there about the leader of some party making statements of which he may or may not know that he's in where he shouldn't be. And I think that is risky business from the other side of the coin, that a hate isn't set up against that mosque for because of somebody's perception. I just raised that as a point. Last point, and you can answer these all together. This is to Mr. Paulson. I recognize you, I don't exact your really words, Mr. Paulson, that you couldn't support the tone that was in this document, United Against Terrorism, which was put together by the Islamic Social Services Association, National Council of Canadian Muslims, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I wonder, could you expand on that a little? Because the document at the end is talking about together we will build a secure, inclusive and just Canada, and I read the RCMP Section 3 of that document, and I think there's tremendous information in here for parents, internet safety, root causes of terrorism, where to go for assistance, and so on. So I wonder, could you expand on that, because I think the wrong impression is being left since you withdrew your support for this document of which your name is now on, and it's in public circles. So 2 questions, really. Sorry, Mr. Chair, for been so long.
Well, let's start with your first question first. So we have charged Yousafzai. We are actively investigating many other criminal allegations, and it's not by way of an excuse. This is complicated work. It's hard to get the evidence, and but we're on it. And but as I said, the pace and tempo of investigations, I think, is brisk. Your last question, I think there was 3 of them, but I'll go to the last question with respect to the pamphlet. So the chapter in the RCMP is quite good because we wrote it. I think what I took issue with was, all of our efforts that we're talking about here today is this collaborative, joint engagement with communities, and there is a tone in some elements of the pamphlet, which I think sets an adversarial tone as between authorities and communities, and that's not what we're after. So I stand by the RCMP's chapter, and I stand by our commitment to continue to work with communities to provide the programs that we've discussed here today.
Question, Madame Duré-Lefebvre.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to continue this discussion with the report, 2012, and I'd like to talk about the cuts to the budgets once again. I'd like to quote in English because I only have it in English at the present time, so I'll quote it to you in English for now. Public Security Report, and here it is.
That the Government Operations Center infrastructure may be unable to support a coordinated response to large-scale or multiple significant events affecting the national interest. Fin de la citation. Est-ce qu'on est...
End of quote. Can we, on a national basis, counter terrorist threats in Canada? Because according to the report here, there seems to be some ambiguity or uncertainty as to whether or not we can do it throughout the country, perhaps, as it says, large-scale or multiple activities. So what do you have in place? How can it be managed? And are we really managing this counterterrorism effort in Canada? Well, I thank you very, very much for your question. And as I mentioned initially, our government has been the first to implement a strategy for counterterrorism as early as 2011, not only an intergovernmental strategy, but also to get the legislative tools. Unfortunately, we were unable to convince your party to cooperate with that. We're taking a coordinated approach. We have a strategy in place. Therefore, we have the framework. You will have the opportunity, I believe, very shortly to reaffirm your will to fight against terrorism through concrete action, and so that we can give to our national security apparatus the means by which they can protect us. You're talking a lot about legislative tools and we'd like to translate that to action. Now, during question period or others, whenever we talk about action, we want to have some examples. In the answers that you've given us today, you've indicated that we are going to allocate the resources where they are needed. Now, with all the budgetary cuts and restrictions that have been imposed on national security, where are you going to find those resources to counter this terrorist threat? Now, you're cutting here. You're going to have to replace that money somewhere, somehow, in order to fight terrorism. Well, first of all, the mission of our security and intelligence apparatus is to protect Canadians. Very significant resources are being allocated there. I mentioned this afternoon some of the training that the RCMP officers are getting, and they're being assigned specifically as counterterrorism agents. And once again, I would ask, I could ask the Commissioner to repeat once again all the efforts that have been made to train these individuals. And you have no idea of how many activities that we've had with various cultural communities in Canada to dissuade, to reduce radicalization. And I would invite the Commissioner once again, but I mean, be frank, Mr. Commissioner. Everything that you've done, don't be shy. There's been such a lot done. We could submit to the committee. Well, I'll leave the floor to the Commissioner. Well, we have a list. Yeah. Well, resources that are being allocated to terrorism, anti-terrorism. Yes, but where? Where are these resources coming from? You're under budget constraints yourself, as a department, as a service. We all are. So where's this money coming from? Let's be clear on the cuts. That was during the that stems from the 2008 economic crisis. There have been no cuts for frontline services. There's been a reallocation, But CSIS, for example, has as its primary priority this security issue. So perhaps we'll allow the Commissioner to take the floor for a moment or two to reply.
We're taking investigators and resources, and I think public safety and crime prevention area gives us resources for outreach programs, as the Minister was mentioning, literally hundreds upon hundreds of community outreach events where we've gone into the community and engaged with local citizens. The resources are existing within our allocations.
Est-ce que c'est possible, peut-être M. Guimont aussi, qui est notre...
Perhaps Mr. Guimont could add some detail to that. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In these budgetary constraints that we faced, as with any other organization, it's all a matter of prioritization. It's a bit of a diet, let's say, cutting the fat from time to time. We can't have a dozen priorities all at once. We have to be able to rank them. And when times are tough, we do our very, very best to be more efficient. We streamline. And I think that we can still provide the service for which we're responsible adequately and fully. No, the connective tissue has to be rebuilt, perhaps, but it's not incompatible with having a budget reduction and having an efficient system. There's no contradiction there.
Mr. Carmichael, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to go back to Mr. Coulombe and finish off my last question to you. And I have two questions for you, if I could. The first is with regards to, and I should say that my colleagues have talked about meeting their constituents, and I've done likewise. And my constituents are equally alarmed at the concerns of radical extremism that would affect us here at home. And obviously we took a step last night in our vote that would allow us to go into Iraq and to address that issue at that location, but our Canadians are alarmed and concerned at home. So I'd like to ask you two questions. The first is, have we identified how many Canadians are actually traveling abroad for the express purpose of joining extremist activities, be it with ISIL or others? The second is, and to your point, and following up on Mr. Easter's question regarding this report, we talk about some 80 individuals that have been identified as returning home. I'd like to know how hard that 80 number is. Is it a guesstimate? Is it 150? Is it close to 80? Number one. Number two, do we know where they are? Do we know where they live? And have any charges been brought to bear on any of those individuals?
I'll start with the last one in terms of charges, because I will turn that one to Commissioner Paulson. In terms of the number of, do we know the number of Canadians who are overseas involved in threat-related activities, be in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and the list goes on? The number we're quoting at the time, 130, by the time I leave this room, it's going to change. It's fluctuating all the time. It hasn't increased substantially since my appearance in February. That number are the number that we can confirm a nexus to Canada, and we can confirm the individuals are involved in terrorist-related activities. That's the one we know. Are there some that we are not aware of? Probably. So I don't want to speculate. I've read in the media it's probably up to 300. Like, the service doesn't go there. We go with facts. That's the facts. Between 30 and 145 that we can confirm. Same with the 80. That's not speculation. That's the one we can confirm. They were involved in terrorist-related activities overseas. They're now back in Canada. It's a firm number that we're aware of. And yes, we know where they are.
Thank you. I've got more, but go ahead, Minister, if you'd like to jump in on that. To Commissioner Paulson, then, the CTIO role. You talked about the training, the number of people, 300 and some that are actually trained and in the field today, with quite a number more in the process. You're putting them on the front line in police forces across Canada. I wonder if you could talk to the role and what you're finding with that role now. I'm encouraged hearing that report. I'd like to know, are we seeing any success with it? Are we seeing or hearing anything that would give us comfort to know it's working?
Yeah, well, first of all, the number's quite high. It's much more. I think 300 was in the last fiscal year that we've trained. I think we're up to about 1,500. Okay. But the role is one to begin to, I guess, socialize our frontline police officers with this process and to look for indicators. They might go into a house or on a call and they may see a young person who's exhibiting behaviors that they might just sort of ignore because they're not in their sort of their frame of reference. And so the CTIO program has been particularly helpful at bringing those sensitivities to our frontline officers so that we can identify trends and we can intervene in the pre-criminal space and start to try and bring resources from communities to bear on those kind of people. Also, they're a resource for officers who want to know more. So it's been highly successful, it's been highly useful, and we continue to support it.
So when we talk about the CTIO role, are these RCMP officers that are embedded, or are we training actually frontline police in
we're training
local police forces across
in local
Canada?
Police forces?
Yeah.
We're training, obviously, the area that I have control over is a lot of RCMP detachments. They'll have CTIOs because they're not sort of, you know, in a small detachment. We might have 5 or 6 officers there. They got a lot of other things to do. And so what we'll do is have that officer trained to bring it back and sort of bring it to the detachment. And there's other police forces that are engaged. Our Countering Violent Extremism program, we are in a unique partnership with Public Safety, the Service, and the Toronto Police Service, who have a tremendously effective, tried, and demonstrated network into all the communities. And so we're overlaying this sort of approach into their existing infrastructure, and we're finding it to be very, very useful.
Thank you.
And down for a couple of minutes, Mr. Scott, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just have one question, and I hope I can direct it to Mr. Coulombe. The Security Council's resolution on September 24th, operative paragraph 9, says the Security Council calls upon member states to require that airlines operating in their territories provide advanced passenger information to the appropriate national authorities in order to detect the departure from their territories by means of civil aircraft of individuals designated by various Security Council committees. So the reason I'd asked the earlier question of the Minister about whether or not we need to implement some kind of exit control system was because of this provision. Earlier, your predecessor, Mr. Fadden, in testimony before the Senate on S7, said two very interesting things. One, he said that because of changes that were coming forward in S7, there's going to need to be more cooperation with CATSA and with the CBSA in trying to be aware of who's leaving the country. He said, quote, "A complicating factor is that Canada has no system for controlling exits. We do not even have a system to be aware when people are leaving. This will involve more than the CBSA. It may well involve CATSA." Then he said, "I should not say much more because I will get myself into a situation where I will not be able to get myself out of," end of quote. Then he later said, quote, "The current structure of the no-fly list program is such that you have to be a threat to aviation. My understanding is that officials are preparing a series of proposals for ministers to try to make this list a little more subtle, but I do not know where they are on it," end of quotation. So I'd simply like to ask, one way or the other, has some kind of a cooperative framework evolved to have a kind of a de facto exit control system, and or has the no-fly list been tweaked or changed as a result of Cabinet having looked at these proposals? I'm asking Mr. Coulombe.
Monsieur Guimond could very pertaining comment.
I prefer Mr. Coulombe, please.
Well, on both the no-fly list and in terms of the entry-exit information, in both cases, in terms of piloting changes to the no-fly list, it is not the service who has the responsibility of driving those files.
So maybe, Mr. Chair, maybe our deputy minister. Yeah, we are
All right, thank you, Minister. Mr. Chair, actually, we don't call the no-fly list. This program is called the Passenger Protect Program. Just to be accurate, we manage. Well, we manage it in public safety.
I've known many people.
The program has been in place since 2007, and it is operating under the same basis as it has been since that period of time. Now, like any other program, we're always looking. But right now, the program stands as it is, and it's not an exit program.
Fine. Thank you very much, Mr. Guimond. And just before we close off this meeting tonight, the chair would obviously this obviously is a very, very, very serious topic that we have been discussing today, and certainly a number of messages that we can take from this committee and from this testimony today. And maybe one of them, I know that the chair certainly heard loud and clear, is, well, certainly not being alarmist. Mr. Paulson, Mr. Coulombe have always said we need to be vigilant. So I thank you very kindly for those words. And to my committee members, thank you very kindly for your considerate and meaningful questions today, and to our witnesses. There's no greater responsibility that we have as parliamentarians or as gentlemen filling your responsibilities than to protect the public. And so we thank you for your work, not just before this committee, but certainly for the continued work we do on behalf of all Canadians. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.